Are you next?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Alex Ware from The Guardian. I planned an intro slide, but this is not necessary anymore. Over the last 6 months, I have stood in the wrong place for the AV. Over the last 6 months, my team at The Guardian has been working on a new app to allow users to read the newspaper on their devices. And over this, I'm going to talk about the back end of this app, because they accidentally let a back-end developer into this conference. Sorry, Annie. I'm going to quickly talk about the requirements, how we met them, some of the technical details, and a few of the lessons we learned. So this daily news app replaced an existing, much-beloved iPad app called the Daily Edition, which would allow the user to read the reader to read the day's paper on their iPad. And people loved this, and we wanted to make it available to everybody. And the big thing here is offline, because you really want to read the paper and you don't want to think about the fact that you're on the tube or you're like on a plane or you're in that one part of the British countryside, as in the whole of the British countryside that has no mobile phone signal. And when you want something offline, you want it to work as soon as you pick it up. So we do the downloads overnight. And you all know Apple are fickle masters and would very much limit the amount of work you can do overnight. So we want to do this in the absolute minimum of HTTP transactions. And it also had to be usable by our production team. So what we figured out was to build a Node backend in TypeScript, which would share its types with the main app, and we would just lift and shift the whole of the API to S3 every night for each edition, and we would put that in a zip file and drop it onto your device overnight. So you'd wake up, start accessing files from the zip as if it was S3, just completely transparently. And we were hoping to use the if modified since HTTP header to do cool stuff. So the production team just used the backend over HTTP. Serverless function that's also an express service. And then we'd have an archiver that would just copy everything overnight to S3 and then zip it up. And then the user would transparently access either their own file system or HTTP, depending on whether they had an internet connection or not, whether the content had been downloaded. It's harder to use the async storage things for large quantities of images and stuff like that. So we were very much limited to what can we do with a file system. And file systems, HTTP, zip files, and S3 buckets, they all have very similar properties. What unique things are is slightly different, so you've got to be careful. But it's not a very big shift in mindset if you write your abstractions nicely. So our archiver, for each publication, we grab every path, save it to S3, ls that, zip it, put it back, boom. And we did this using a lot of serverless functions that we would orchestrate together using Amazon step functions, which are just finite state machines. And we defined this all using another AWS technology called CDK, which allows you to define your whole architecture in TypeScript. This is super useful, as you'll never have to look at YAML again. And this worked really well. HTTP last modified. If you're dealing with tricky stuff over HTTP in a browser, it's great, your browser does it. But on a device, you have to really think, it's what do I want? And if you've got a resource modified at 2 p.m., and you ask, has this been modified since 3? And it's no, it hasn't. But if you ask, has it been modified since 1 p.m., it sends you the horrible goose, 200 OK. Really good, didn't use it in the end. It turned out our actual requirement was slightly different to this, but if you're working on difficult offline stuff, it's sometimes easy. It's sometimes really nice to go back into a level of abstraction and think, what does HTTP give me? Can I use e-tags? Can I use last modified? Is this useful in my use case? No. So in retrospect, what did we learn? We learned step functions, super cool. CDK lets us use TypeScript for infrastructure. It's the front end written in TypeScript, the back end written in TypeScript, the infrastructure provisioned in TypeScript. It's one language for everything. It's really good. If you have ways of doing this with whoever you're working with, that is really perfect. And always start your projects with an experimentation phase. if you're not quite sure how you're going to do something, do it lots of different ways and let them not be very good until you find the one that is actually very good. And the last modified updater looked really cool. No. Because we learned that most of our stuff was images. And when you don't update images, you have unique keys for them. Decoupling the archiver from the API was a massive success. It allowed the app to be developed against the nascent HTTP API until the archiver was ready so that the app could be developed against the file system as well. And this worked really well for JSON and images. And then we found out the majority of what we were doing was images. And we could have maybe come up with a different solution that was more image first. But it worked really well, so it's not a big problem. And we also should have used tar.gz instead of zip for images. If you're going to be shipping a lot of images to a device overnight, use tar.gz instead of zip, because zip contains all the metadata at the end of the archive. Tar.gz has it all interspersed, so if you get a partial download, you get half your images, which is better than none of them. And thank you.
Thank you, Alex.